Hello, everybody. Sorry we're starting a bit late, but here we are, and we got the full crew today. There's me, Mike, Shannon, and Karis, and we are going to start off talking about personal housing plans. Yeah, that's what you was that what you asked
Yeah,
about, Mike?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you want to do it first, cool. Yeah,
Well, unless anyone's got any news they want to report. Um,
I've got something that you might want to put on your website. So I'm doing like a video about trying my best to find ways to explain local connection in a way people understand. So I'm going to do like a map of the Part 6 residence requirements, which is different in every area than the Part 7, which is always the same, which is like 6 out of 12 months or whatever. But in doing that, I've basically now got an Excel spreadsheet of all the different housing allocation policies in the country. So if you can make use of that on your website, just means if someone wants to get a housing allocation policy nice and quick, they can look at the area and then just go straight to it. Because some councils they kind of make it quite difficult to actually find the policy on their website. Most are fine, but there are a few that I had to really dig around to actually get it out. So
mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah,
can send
please
that over to you
do.
at some point. Cool.
I'm just going to get rid of this so I can put comments in here. Because we've got a couple of comments. I think I can put that there and then try again. Hang on. Let's see if that works. No, for some reason it's putting the. Oh, yeah, I see what it's doing. Sorry. Bear with me a sec. I've just got to adjust the comments thing. So there we go. So we've got hello to you too, Ginger G. And thank you for letting me set up the comments correctly. So I'll put that in the middle. This will be hopefully a default setting next time with a nicer background. So yes, what was the thing, Mike? It's a map of local. It was mapping the parts of Part 7 with about local connection. Sorry, I was fiddling with that
Yeah,
then.
so my mouse is just gone weird. Yeah, yeah. So it's not the I've got the data as well in terms of like what is the minimum residence requirement for each LA, and
Oh
it
yeah.
varies between like some areas you just have to live there. You don't even have to have like minimum like length of time, which I say is useful in itself. But there's also as a part of doing that, I've just basically dug out the links to every housing allocation policy. So if someone wanted to see what their local policy was and they can't find it on the website then they could just use the document to go to the link straight away. So yeah, I'll send it over to you basically, so you can use it if you want.
Excellent, thank you. Um, right, so anything else? Oh yeah, we're going to talk about personal housing plans. Um, so um, this is yeah. I mean, they're a subject that I think needs to be discussed quite a lot because I still don't quite understand them myself. I was having to discuss them with somebody today, and I still didn't feel too confident about it as to whether it's ever worth requesting a review of a personal housing plan, say. As because you can always ask for it. If you think it's wrong, you can always ask for it to be updated, which sort of means that it's not like a review where you're out of time because you can just say, I think you forgot about this. Could you have another look and update it?
It's
What do
really
you
weird
think?
because you so if I get this right, you can't challenge you can't get, request review about the assessment. You can't
Yeah.
challenge the steps that you have to take, but you can challenge the steps that the local authority has to take. So it's bizarre all the way through. It's ridiculous.
Mm.
But then if you can't, because you can't review the steps you have to take, but if the council then try and say that you've unreasonably and deliberately refused to cooperate, then you can challenge that decision. It's just I doubt very often that the kind of councils even get that far. It's just so onerous to actually kind of get down that path. I think the main problem is just they just ignore it and don't kind of do anything when they should do it. I noticed I was reading around a little bit, and I did find a case involving Tower Hamlets where the LGSCO basically found maladministration where it took 10 days to make a PHP from the point of making an application. Because we've often asked, like, when does the PHP have to be given? And there's no set amount of time. But in this Tower Hamlets case, yeah, basically said 10 days was too long. And so So it's interesting. So clearly, like the intention is it's supposed to be done very soon in the process, unless
That
there's
is
a good
pretty
reason
soon,
not to.
isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it was 10 working days, I should say. So
Right,
yeah, two
that's
weeks.
2
But
weeks.
yeah, yeah. I
And
can if I can send you that link if you're interested, and if you want to put it
yes,
into the live stream chat, or whatever.
yes, please. Because I would be interested to see, is it 10 days from when they accept some sort of duty, or
So it's literally when it's actually when the application's made. I did check that because usually there's going to be a bit of a delay between accepting the application and actually being satisfied that you're homeless and eligible, which is the trigger point for a PHP being done. But yeah, in that report, yeah, it was literally from the point of making the application. So I mean, there was some other LGSEO ones where I found there was like 3 month delay, which is obviously by definition a complete ridiculous thing. And I think there was actually specific criticism in this Tower Hamlets case because it basically meant that the council didn't actually do any preventative work, so it delayed them actually trying to prevent the person from becoming homeless. I don't know if that was because there was a reasonable prospect of them actually staying there or something. I don't know, but yeah, as I sort of say, like it's the closest I've ever seen to a time limit as such.
oh, let me just, sorry, Mike, I'm just trying to get this. I'll have to go to the actual website because I can't download the PDF from the comment on here, but I can get it. I think I can get it from the live stream if I go to the actual.
I'll tell you what paragraph it is in a moment, actually. So it's paragraph 6, is it?
Okay, bear with me. From the comment on here, but sorry, right. So comments. Maybe your. I think it might take a minute on here for your comment to arrive because
It is in a moment, actually.
it's backdated. But yeah, if you email it to me, I can pick it up that way probably as quickly.
I'll do that. Hold on.
Send it to the Gmail one, yeah.
Yeah, it's coming your way. I mean, I
Thank
did
you.
some other, as I say, I was trying to like I'm going to try and do a formal video about this. So I did kind of dig out some other bits as well. But I would say the most important thing for people to understand is how important it is to communicate with the council, any kind of medical issues, any kind of support needs, any kind of disabilities. You need to, but basically in that assessment, so the assessment that's done, it's called the Section 189A assessment. I'm sure that, if you don't tell them that sort of stuff, they won't ask. So you just need to be very specific about, kind of what you're telling them and make sure they've kind of got it in writing so that they then can't say, oh, we didn't know about this. There's also there's some interesting cases somewhere about the difference between wishes and needs, because often you tell the council you need something, they'll say, oh, that's just a wish, so we have to do that.
Yeah.
But there's been some interesting cases around that, which I found one of them today, but it wasn't the one I was after. But there was kind of specific stuff. I think it might even be the YRV Lambeth actually, but they kind of say like what a need actually is. So and I guess the whole thing is like if they haven't done that and then they offer accommodation and you challenge the suitability, then if they haven't done the assessment beforehand, then they're going to lose the argument if it does go to court, which it probably won't. But yeah,
So
so
this is the
there's
one.
some other question, there's some other bits I haven't kind of figured out yet, but that's kind of a sort of sketched out this kind of stuff, which I'm hoping will form the basis of a video about it. But yeah, so sorry, Sean.
No, sorry, go on.
I was going to say I think it's paragraph 16. So it's on page 6, top of page 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See if I can zoom in. Yeah, I can. So Miss X became homeless in March 2019, sooner than the council had. Whoops. I think it should be about to say expected or something. Hang on.
Should I read it from Mike because I can see the whole thing?
Yeah, I'll just make it. Yes, there we go. Had negotiated, and only 3 weeks after it had issued her PHP, there was not sufficient time to prevent Ms. X becoming homeless, in part because the council took 10 working days from Ms. X presenting as at risk of homelessness to assess her and issue her PHP. This delay was also at fault. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because they're blaming Because normally you'd say it's just an assessment. If they're saying that they didn't to prevent her becoming homeless, I mean, i.e., they didn't give her Section 188 accommodation.
I think it's more about so then I haven't actually read the whole thing, but it's probably more because the LGSCO is essentially saying that if they had acted sooner, they might have actually been able to prevent her becoming homeless in the first place. That's my guess.
Okay.
And then there's kind of subsequent delays in terms of providing interim accommodation once she then became homeless. But I think I'm guessing the inference is that the LGSO said that had the council acted when it should have, it would have stopped her being homeless because there was some straightforward bit of work to do, whatever around it. I don't know. But yeah,
Okay, well, that's interesting because that shows the importance of getting personal housing plan done quickly.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's not saying like, oh, it's a 10-day limit, but it's giving. I think it's a good indicator of what's considered to be a timely PHP.
um, yeah. So can I? I mean, I think I don't think I'm doing anything wrong here because I'm not giving any names away or disclosing any particular individuals. I'm just gonna, but it is based on a real case that I'm trying to get my head around to see if anybody can help me out here because I'm usually I think if you sort of dig deep enough or think long enough, you can find a way that most people can get housed if they're homeless, if only because the fact that people have become homeless normally means that something's gone wrong and they might be a bit more vulnerable or have needs. But if I outline these circumstances, so the person, and forgive me if you're the person listening, but hopefully it won't identify you. Person is homeless because they can't occupy their family home because they have an alcohol problem, which was compounded by the fact that they got reported to children's services for slapping one of their children, which led children's services to saying that the person couldn't live in the family home. And they even got a court order to prevent this. There's no other diagnosed medical problems other than the drink problem, which the person has stopped drinking for 6 months, I think, or even longer. But the council initially accepted a relief duty, and then at the end of it said sorry, and issued a negative Section 184 saying no priority need. And I was trying to think how to challenge that because obviously, and interrupt if you think I've missed something obvious. Um,
Risk of relapse.
well, yeah, that I was interested to see what you thought of that because that's the one. So if we were to say the person is is vulnerable because they have an alcohol problem and they would be likely to relapse if they became homeless. Um, is it as simple as that? I mean, I was thinking, is there an established case that actually says relapse equals vulnerable, or
So
risk of relapse equals vulnerable?
Cross v Westminster basically says that although, I mean, this is the language it uses in its 2006 case, although self-induced drug addiction and I guess influence alcohol use as well would not in itself constitute another special reason where the risk of relapse, when someone was genuinely trying to deal with it, the risk of relapse would be considered a special reason for the purposes of vulnerability or whatever. I can't this. I'm just paraphrasing that, but basically, so what they're saying is that it could in theory be a standalone category of priority need on it. So you wouldn't need to kind of bring in other kind of risks as well. And then if you look at 8.40 of the Code of Guidance, it talks about kind of common mental health and drug and alcohol problems or something like that. I'll find the exact wording. So first of all, it can definitely be part of a composite test. But what you're saying is it might actually be the only, it might just be the only kind of identified thing about this person. So yeah,
Yeah,
so 8.40. Um, Housing authorities need to be aware that an applicant may be considered vulnerable for a special reason because of a combination of factors which, taken alone, may not necessarily lead to a decision they're vulnerable. For example, drug and alcohol problems, common mental health problems, a history of sleeping rough, no previous experience managing a tenancy. So, but yeah, if you're saying literally there's no other, that's it. The risk of relapse is it. then I think Crossley says that it could be. I think you need to get
Yeah.
evidence from a drug and alcohol service or something to kind of lay that assessment out.
Yes.
So
But thank you. That's a start. Um, but I don't know, because I was thinking about the relief duty, because they'd accepted a relief duty and said, sorry, we can't find anything, which I always find a bit of a unbelievable, really, because a local authority with its resources ought to be able to find something for someone, because they've got a whole load of accommodation that they would be providing if they owed a Section 188 duty, if you see what I mean. So if somebody applies and they, just for the sake of argument, they have a medical condition which gives rise to priority need, then the council would be accepting a mandatory duty and would presumably pull a rabbit out of the hat there, wouldn't they? Because otherwise they'd be getting JR'd or something. So it seems really dishonest to say we haven't been able to find you anything. What do you think of that?
I don't know. Sorry, I was just trying to find the bit I was talking about, but I just think it's actually on your website. So
Oh,
I think you've just been sharing it on your screen whilst I've been looking for it. So
oh,
sorry,
sorry,
looking
sorry.
looking at
Yeah,
the wrong
yeah.
screen.
No,
So sorry, what was you? So sorry, say that again, Will. Sorry,
well,
I
I think
missed it.
there's a fundamental dishonesty in a local authority saying to somebody who isn't in priority need but is owed a relief duty, I'm sorry, after 8 weeks, sorry, we couldn't find you anything. Um, where the reason I think it's dishonest is because if the person was in priority need, they'd definitely been able to find something because they'd have to. And so it's not the unavailability of accommodation that's the problem, it's the attitude to the council. And they must have ring fenced that accommodation to say we'll only give it to people in priority need. And whilst I can understand the need to stop people like me challenging them for not doing it, it seems unfair to say to somebody, we couldn't find you anything, so sorry, you can sleep on the street.
I think their position would be we have a duty to protect taxpayers' money, and so we're effectively saying we will only house people who we've got an absolute duty to house. That's probably their position. Um,
Mm,
was there anything in the PHP that kind of, because I think it goes back to our question of like PHPs in general, is what reasonable steps did the council say they would undertake to
mm.
relieve the person's homelessness? And if there is no evidence that they undertook those steps, then there seems to be a challenge in that. Although I don't know if you end up with an offer of accommodation at the end of it.
Yeah, it just seems it's difficult to challenge it, isn't it? It's like with those sort of Waltham Forest cases where they say we on the day we offered you the accommodation in sort of suburbs of Newcastle, that was the only accommodation available to us between here and Newcastle. I mean, you can't sort of go back in time and sit at their shoulder and say, well, where did you look here? Did you look there? You just have to say, well, they said that's it. But I'll look more into that.
So, Will, did you just go? I might have just got confused there. Did you go to your own website because you've got an
No, I did.
outline of
Well, if I didn't, it's let me see.
because
Maybe,
you've got because the bit you flashed up there, I don't think it's going to help
oh
you out. But if you
yeah,
go
yeah.
to your own
I'm sorry,
bit,
I wrote on it.
sec,
Sorry.
second, or the last kind of
Yeah, you can tell I'm
last third.
fairly. This only came up recently, so I haven't done a lot of research. I just thought I'd throw it in. So what did I say here? In Crossley was I may have just copied this. I copied this from the solicitor's journal. So in that case, they said, well, they reported the case as being that the applicant asserted he was in priority need as he was vulnerable for other special reason. Despite the evidence that the applicant was addicted to hard drugs, he had made attempts to stop this and that accommodation would support and facilitate his recovery. The authority held he was not vulnerable as he could continue to receive support even if he were homeless. The county court judge took the view that the authority had reached a conclusion that was unreasonable and perverse. On appeal, the Court of Appeal held that the decision letter had failed to deal with the reason for vulnerability raised by the applicant. The applicant had presented with stark facts pointing towards vulnerability for statutorily recognised reasons, and the authority had failed in its obligation to acknowledge, take into account, or evaluate those facts. The court went on to comment that although self-induced drug addiction would not constitute some other special reason, where a person was attempting to deal with their addiction, the possibility of relapse was a potential other special reason within the meaning of the legislation. Authorities were cautioned that there might be different causes for alleged vulnerability. They should consider vulnerability as a whole to avoid dividing up different issues affecting the applicant between the different potential causes. Oh, that's really good. Thank you. I sort of helped thank you for helping me help myself there, because with that
Yeah, I
report.
think
Yeah.
I think the question would be just trying to get evidence from if there was kind of involvement from a treating professional, just to get
Yeah.
their opinion of it. I mean,
No,
being
I'm going
homeless
to do
is
that
obviously going to
again.
put someone at risk of relapse, basically, if they it just will do.
I'm also tend to think with alcoholism, less so perhaps with drug addiction, but because drug addiction, well, I don't know, both of them, I tend to think that both of them are symptoms of perhaps some underlying problem, or maybe I'm just being naive that because when I was brought up, there was this, we were always being told at school, watch out because there's these pushers out there that will try and get you to take heroin, and you have a couple of hits on that and then you're addicted. And you could say, well, that's just bad luck, isn't it? It can happen to anyone. So there's no underlying vulnerability there that leads you to become an addict. But
There's I need to find a study. There's a really interesting study done looking at patients who were prescribed high levels of opiates over a period of time. So they were physically addicted to opiates, and then their basically medical their medical issue was sorted out. So they was then no longer prescribed it. Only something like 2 or 3% of those went on to kind of continue illicit use. So basically, heroin is not as addictive as people kind of like to make
yeah,
out,
yeah,
because I
yeah,
had the same message when I was at school. But so it's I can't say it's always going to be cake, but there is very high correlation between traumatic life events and use of any substance really that's going to kind of deal with that stress or whatever. So um, and
yeah,
I think I think the homeless sector actually, probably one of the things it does well is it kind of does a lot of stuff around trauma and kind of the connection with kind of these other issues. But I don't think housing officers are anywhere near kind of accepting that kind of wisdom. I think they're just very resistant to it. And in that sense, have a very Victorian kind of a view on it. I mean, I was at an event a couple of weeks ago now, which has kind of involved Southampton University, which has got a really cool professor called Nick Maguire, who's a psychologist and has done a huge amount of this stuff over the last couple of decades. He's well worth checking out if you're interested in it, because um, yeah, it's just the whole worldview of that kind of psychological approach is just way better than what we have, and just kind of trying to punish people for stuff and whatever.
oh yeah.
So
How do we find out more about his work?
um so Google him, Nick Maguire. I'm sure, I don't know if he's got any books out. He's certainly contributed to books. And I don't know, because the event I went to, I don't know if it's going to end up on their Facebook or YouTube or whatever. If I find it, I'll share it with you, because it was a fascinating. It's got me thinking anyway, because it was a fascinating event. The first like 20 minutes was basically these guys with like previous experience of being homeless ripping the shit out of the sector, just like totally going gung ho and saying like this is genuinely traumatic. And then you had a whole bunch of housing officers basically say, yeah, no, that's not true. We're great. And if we aren't very good, then it's because of lack of funding. And they just would not hear that these individuals were saying my experience of going through these services was terrible and it really did me a lot of damage. They could not. It seemed that they could not hear that message. So and then Nick Maguire kind of dropped in, because I think, oh man, it was embarrassing. Some professional said about like we shouldn't give out tents or something like that because we'll encourage homelessness. And Nick Maguire very politely and kind of just kind of said, well, that kind of idea of like reinforcing behavior or not reinforcing behavior is just like just silly. And kind of, I don't know what he said. Whatever he said, it was amazing. He just basically ruined that kind of idea that we should be thinking that we should be kind of influencing people's behavior through rewards and punishments or whatever.
Hmm. Oh, I'll just find out more about that. Well, I'll just go back to the bit, the screen that's got the comments page, which I think is this one. And because Anthony's put a couple of questions up, which I'm sorry, I haven't, I think that's your first one. Excuse me. So Anthony says, a person moved to Bournemouth to be told by BCP Council that they have to go back to the borough they came from to be housed. They can't help after fighting point. He now private rents. Any suggestion? Now there is I don't know if this is a follow up. No, there's a separate question. So hang on. I think that's a standalone, isn't it, Anthony? So,
I think that the second question does lead on from
oh,
it
okay,
because I
sorry.
think because the person's saying that this person is in now in private rented accommodation, and then the next question is, can they get their deposit back? But the problem they've now got is they're not classed as homeless. So if you go to Bournemouth, even if Bournemouth did follow the law and not try and use local connection as a reason to get rid of you, they would essentially be entitled to say you have a legal right to occupy this accommodation, and unless it's unsuitable for some reason or unreasonable to continue to occupy for some reason, then we don't have any duties to you under homelessness law. So I think that's
So
that's
how
I
does
think
sorry,
that's the problem that kind of
how does that tie in with that one? Sorry,
so so they said that
I'm a
they
bit slow
so there's
tonight.
at the end it says he's now private renting. So essentially, he did approach Bournemouth. They did say go back to your borough, which may well have been well, probably was unlawful at that
Mhm.
point. But then he's been able to find private rented accommodation somewhere, and so presumably has a tenancy now, and so isn't
Right.
homeless anymore.
And if the same person paid a deposit,
I think so.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's how I read it.
So I
Yeah.
don't think they could claim it back, could they? It's just bad luck that
No,
they,
you're now locked. Yeah,
yeah.
with a tenancy, you're now locked. Yeah, if you were to leave that tenancy, without a good reason, then that would be a situation where you would be found intentionally homeless, like you actually would be intentionally homeless. If you said, "Well, I'm going to give up this property so I can go and reapproach Bournemouth," Bournemouth might then say, "Well, okay, we'll actually follow the law. We won't gatekeep you and say that you haven't got a local connection, but what we're now going to do is say that you did have accommodation that was reasonable to live in and you left it." And that would be intentional homelessness unless there is something else happening in the situation that we're not seeing in these questions.
Right, thanks. And Anthony's got another question which ties in with what we were just talking about. Um, if you have an alcohol-related illness, can this help towards getting housed? Well, my thought on that one is, what do you mean by alcohol-related illness? Because there's alcoholism itself, which is an illness, I guess. But
I guess
it's
things like
yeah,
cirrhosis, or
right.
some people can go blind, can't they?
Dementia.
And have problems with your memory and all sorts.
I've seen housing officers say all of those secondary issues are a lifestyle choice because the person's drinking, but that's not the way it should be looked at anyway. But yeah, but so housing officers should look at the health issues as a pure medical issue. So if you have cirrhosis of the liver, as Shannon says, or if you've got Wernicke's encephalopathy or something like that, where you can't remember your name and stuff like that, then you don't say, "Oh, well, that's your own fault for drinking." You say you have a alcohol-related brain injury, therefore we're going to ask the question. I mean, I think that there's a really old priority need case that involved Waveney Council, where there's a guy with
Yeah,
it was
I
like
think I remember
1983,
this
kind of
one.
it gets like reported on a lot, like 1983, and he had an alcohol-related brain injury. I think he was in a night shelter or something like
Is
that.
it
So
because he
there's
crossed the road while he'd been drinking and
yeah, I
uh,
can't.
yeah,
I've never read the full case,
it
but
was a ridiculous case because they said it was your fault for drinking or something that you got run over. I think
yeah,
I may be doing them a disservice, but it really was stretching causation. Uh, I don't think we're going to find it right now. Let's just see priority. Oh yes, yes. No, we're probably not going to find that one. But I think, I mean, obviously, yeah. Thank you, Shannon. Those are obviously alcohol-related illnesses, or you could call them the sort of damage that's done to you by alcohol. Um, so yeah, I mean, those would all help. I think the only situation where you couldn't say that it was could help you if you presented and said, my problem is I'm an alcoholic and I'm drinking a lot and it leaves me disorientated, and I can't function properly. And they might then say, well, that you could then get into an argument that's a lifestyle choice or not. But um, even then, I mean, it depends on why you've got, as we were saying before, why you've got the alcohol problem. It may be that it's a symptom of underlying problems which would make you vulnerable anyway. But if you were a perfectly healthy person who just drank a lot, then that would probably exclude you from priority need. Same with using drugs. But if you, I had a case, I was really interesting case I was dealing with last week about antisocial behaviour, and the question of a closure order had been made on someone's house because of antisocial behaviour coming from it. And David Cameron introduced some new grounds for defence, grounds for seeking possession where closure orders were made, or where people have been convicted of things like rioting and stuff. And so that as long as you could prove that the person had been convicted or a closure order was made, the court have to make a possession order. There's absolutely no discretion. Um, but of course, there is a get out on that one, which is if the reason for the closure order is something arising out of disability, then the court can't make a possession order initially because it's disability discrimination. So in my case, there was a lot of noise nuisance, and the guy in question was somebody who had done a lot of drugs, but mainly when he was younger, and he's probably still using on a low level at the moment. But the behaviour that was complained of was other people coming to his house and sort of banging on the door and ringing buzzers in the middle of the night. It wasn't him. And so the reason I think we've got quite a good argument to say that that is disability discrimination, because he's quite a vulnerable person. He suffers from drug-induced psychosis because he took much too much acid when he was about 18 or 19. And as a result of that, I think he just gets targeted by the sort of local people who like to party too much, and they go to his house. And so I thought, yeah, if we can, all we've got to do is establish that he suffered this damage, that he's not actually actively doing this, and we've got a defence. And similarly, if he's also vulnerable in a way that because some people might say, oh, well, it's just alcohol, it's drug-induced psychosis, so it doesn't count. But of course, once the damage is done, it has a life of its own.
I mean, so now I think now I don't know if now medical still have that position, but they certainly are. The training materials I saw from them ages ago, they had that kind of idea of, oh, if it's drug induced, then it's not real. That's not my understanding. Is that's completely incorrect. In the same way that if you smoke for 60 days for 20 years or something, you get lung cancer, and you continue to smoke, doesn't mean you don't have lung cancer. It's not,
Yeah,
you would deal with the lung cancer as the kind of the question of whether you're vulnerable. I mean,
yeah,
the question kind of followed up there. So I had the example of advanced liver fibrosis, which I'm not come across that diagnosis before. But again, the question is solely what would happen to that person if they were to be homeless. How would that health issue be affected? And as I said, I don't know what the effects of it are. I imagine they aren't good, but that's kind of the route you'd have to take. It's not that a particular diagnosis is going to mean you're definitely in primary need. I think finally on this, I'd also say it's probably not very helpful to approach a counsellor and say you've got alcoholism, because it's a very imprecise term and it's not a medical term, and it's like they might. So I'm one of the first guys I helped. He said on the phone, I'm an alcoholic, and the housing officer just kind of shut off, when really he just come out of hospital having a esophageal varices. It's like kind of like this really kind of life-threatening thing where you can bleed bleed to death basically. And he was on lots of medication for it and stuff. But the housing officer just, as I say, heard the word alcoholism and just shut down. Whereas I think if he said I've got esophageal varices, which I mean, when I went to the night show, I remember a lady died. She was just vomiting this blood, and kind of just didn't make it basically for that reason. But that's the approach the housing officer should take, is looking at the health issue aside from any sort of moral judgments about it. But yeah, I think, as I say,
And I th
not very precise. Sorry, Shannon.
no, no, no. I was just basically going to add to what you're saying. Like, I think we as professionals potentially get really bogged down in like diagnosis and labels and stuff. But actually, even if you are a alcoholic, whatever that looks like, actually the symptoms of that, even sort of like withdrawal symptoms and anxiety that might come with it and everything else, from being compulsively addicted. I wonder if you were to focus on those symptoms, rather than saying it's because of alcoholism or anything else, and actually you could still hit that priority need threshold because it's about how it's affecting your ability to cope with homelessness, not the label or anything else. So you're almost taking, and I would say you're not withholding anything or lying to the council in any way. You're focusing on that test, and getting rid of sort of distracting factors potentially.
Yeah, I agree. I've not seen any cases, for example, that look at the risk of seizures if you're in alcohol withdrawal. But because if you look at someone with epilepsy, I've often seen people with epilepsy kind of get waved through priority need. Yeah, yeah, you've got priority need, no problem. When actually someone who's kind of very, 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 very bad way, kind of not managing their drinking, having lots of unplanned detoxes, that sort of thing, whilst on the streets, like the risk is, probably higher actually that they're going to have a grand mal seizure and die. So I think that would be the correct approach. And I haven't seen any kind of cases really kind of get, certainly not that I've come across which really examine that. But I think that would be the legal principle that you go from is you, yeah, as Shannon says, you kind of look at the actual effects rather than whatever's actually the cause of it.
And wouldn't that meet the test for unconscious bias, really, if you're looking at something? If you said, oh, I've got alcoholism, rather than looking at the disability that arises from alcoholism, there's that unconscious bias of, oh, you're an alcoholic, please just stay away, and that's shut down. So you're unconsciously
Definitely.
discriminating against
I don't
the disability.
I don't know, because isn't there, under the Equality Act, I thought things like gambling, substance misuse, like addiction and stuff, unless it's arisen from a medical beginning, they're not protected from the they're not protected
Yeah,
under the
yeah.
Equality
They're
Act,
not
I
protected
thought.
characteristics.
Unless it's like a substance misuse that's arisen from like a GP prescribing you stuff.
But if you have like let's say you've got a secondary health issue, so let's say you've
Yeah,
got
if it was a
alcohol-related
completely
brain
separate.
injury, but then you say, oh, you're just an alcoholic, but actually it's a health issue then I think yeah, that would seem to me to be a overt discrimination case. Yeah,
There
yeah.
was
I suppose there's not more of this case law out there actually, because you'd assume that it'd be a common question to be asked and to go to court.
it's a strange group of characteristics that are excluded from the Equality Act because you've got drug addiction, alcoholism, but you've also got, I don't know what they were doing when they were coming up with the list, but there's fire starting. Maybe they were listening to Prodigy or something. So we better put that on. And then there was exhibitionism as well, which is,
And stealing, I think, as well.
oh,
Yeah.
well, if you're a if you're but you
I
think,
think
well,
I think
what?
it's what the British public could stomach, and they couldn't stomach the idea of a
Yeah,
kleptomaniac getting protection, which I kind of get, but yeah, if we're to
but
understand, I don't know, if we're to follow the science, it's like I think it becomes a whole different world.
yes, that's true.
But then,
Sorry, go on. Sorry.
no, I just had a question really, and I'm kind of linking it back to PHPs because I saw a PHP recently that basically the local authority was instructing the client that they must continue taking their medication for bipolar. And so on this like alcoholism sort of thing, I'm a little bit like, what's out like, and Mike, you might know if you've done a lot of research and stuff about it recently, but I'm like, surely that's outside of the scope of a housing officer. And then obviously it's even hilarious, like more hilarious because there's got like a little date of when this needs to be completed by. And so very tongue in cheek, it's like, well, do I stop taking my medication after this date? But I just thought it was, yes, we need to include disabilities and diagnosis on a PHP, but to what level of involvement should the local authority say you should be engaging with substance misuse services or with your medication and things like that? Like, and I know there's an argument perhaps for safeguarding, best interest, whatever, but it seemed very, very intimate and controlling, and like if they weren't to do it, and like you were saying, like you can't challenge as a client, you can't challenge your actions on a PHP. So if you were to, you can't then say, well, actually, this medication isn't working for me anymore, so I'm going to stop it for a couple of weeks and see what's what. Or yeah, is it outside the scope? Or
So I don't know. I haven't found that what the criteria is, but there's required steps and recommended steps. And I think council could probably say recommended step is you continue to engage with your mental health, regime or whatever. Do you remember that there's that case? It was like I think in the nearly legal title was like the worst case. Is this the worst homeless decision ever? And it was Torbay Council, and basically this housing officer said you need to engage with the services so you don't try and kill yourself. And the guy basically tried to kill himself, and so they tried to say he was intentionally homeless, and because
Oh,
he'd not
no.
followed the recommended steps in the yeah. So that I mean that was I think the actual, if you Google it, you can actually get the decision. Let me just have a look now. Worst
I think I've got it
homeless
here.
decision ever.
Let me see if I can take us to it. That one.
Yeah, I've got it if you haven't, Will.
Is it this one? Worst part 7 homeless decision ever.
So go down. There's a screenshot of the decision letter itself. If you go down, yeah, Torbay, yeah. If you can zoom in on, it's terrible, but this is what people are up against.
So let's see. It must be for.
So they go up a bit because it's where it says the headed paper.
Oh yeah, here we
Torbay.
go.
If you zoom in there, if we
Is
can
it
read
that
it,
one? Subsequently, you failed. You failed to occupy your room provided for you and have not returned.
So therefore, as you've taken an overdose and have gone against assistance and guidance from mental health, you've been asked to leave your accommodation, and therefore you're intentionally homeless. Yeah.
That is shocking, isn't it?
So I was preparing for a different video tonight, looking at can being pregnant mean you're intentionally homeless? And there's a really old case which basically the judge said essentially the decision had been tainted by the officer's own kind of worldview or whatever, and that has no place in the statute or something like that, which I think kind of is quite encouraging. But I think the number of times housing officers in reality will be just basically just overtly using their worldview to kind of colour their decision. It's very common indeed, I think.
Just time to say hello to Tiff, and don't worry about being late. In fact, you're not this late because I'm late putting your comment up, but you're very welcome whatever time you join us. Yeah, that is interesting. I'd forgotten about that case, but I've got a question. If I could raise it, maybe Shannon, you can help with this. It's because it's more benefits related, and I'm really rusty. And the question is, if you're staying in a travel lodge, which you pay for yourself, as opposed to being put in there by the council, which they increasingly do as temporary accommodation, can you claim housing benefit for that, or personal housing payments? And if not, why not? Is it outside the normal categories of what is considered to be rent?
Yeah, I think so. With universal credit, with the housing element, I think you need like a tenancy or a license agreement and stuff. It would then be housing benefit, and I don't think so. Housing benefit obviously then is through the local authority. I can't see any local authority agreeing to pay that through housing benefit, because again, you don't have an agreement to stay there for like a long time period. Like they could.
But if they put you in there,
business, isn't it?
If the local authority put you in the travel lodge, then presumably
if the local authority puts you in there, then housing benefit would cover, but it'd be a different rate to like the hotel rate that's on the website, for example. Okay. And the local authority has their agreement with the travel lodge.
So that seems pretty unfair if the council. This goes back to the person who's with the alcohol problem. They're having to pay for themselves to be in hotel accommodation, which costs them hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Whereas if the council had picked them up and put them in there, they could have then got that through housing benefit, which that's crying out for a challenge. It's a bit late in the evening to figure out how, but it seems really unfair, doesn't it? Just that if they say, sorry, we can't help you. But
I guess you could potentially apply for a discretionary housing payment. And potentially on universal credit, you could apply for like an emergency loan. There's lots of like different loans and grants, like crisis stuff that you can get from universal credit that you pay back slowly. Lots of different local authorities also have different discretionary pots. So Bedford has one. What's it called? I think Bedford's like the local welfare assistance scheme or something. Which is particularly if you are homeless or going through like big changes in your life, you can apply for it to cover certain costs. So depending on the area, you might be able to get some of that money back. But I guess if you were to challenge the priority need and you won that challenge, would you then not be able to recover the costs via sort of like the complaints procedure afterwards and say like, look, we complained because actually the decision around priority needs was wrong. therefore please backdate, like if he keeps all his receipts and stuff.
That would be a nice thing to do, yeah. And I think it's worth. I mean, thank you. I mean, tonight I'm feeling much more positive about that case than I was an hour ago. So yeah, I'm going to try that. And Anthony's got a comment about universal credit or a question, which I'll need to go to the other screen for, which is that one. No, it's not. It's that one. And there it is. So if universal credit is sure thing for landlords, why do so many decline people on universal credit?
So I think because with the housing element on universal credit, the money goes direct to the individual, and then the individual has to pay that to the landlord. And I think often the concern for landlords is that the person won't pay that because they're not a responsible human being if they've ended up universal credit, which obviously is ridiculous. But there is also a way. So I've done this with clients before to sort of get them into private rented. I've made the argument that actually the person can request from universal credit for universal credit to pay the housing element direct to landlord. And that really, really helps landlords feel more at ease because the money's going straight to them. There's a whole list of requirements that sort of make it a dead cert that you'll get that. But if you sort of are homeless, that's quite a good argument to put forward to your worker on universal credit and ask them to pay direct to landlord. So yeah, that's something that eases it. I don't necessarily understand it personally, but that would be my guess from a landlord's perspective anyway.
Is there still the same rule with universal credit and housing benefit that used to be if the landlord gets paid the rent directly and it later turns out that the tenant was wrongly claiming housing benefit, which they weren't entitled to, the landlord is liable to repay all the housing benefit that was paid to them?
I'm not sure on that one.
Yeah, it's happened. It happened a couple of times to people. I was I wasn't acting for the landlord, but I heard landlords tell me the stories. I mean, it's an absolute nightmare because one you suddenly get a demand for sort of thousands of pounds, which you're not at fault for, and I hope they've changed that now. But I mean, I'd have thought any landlord that's happened to or has heard about that happening to other people would then say, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm just not prepared to take the risk. I don't want the council coming after me for thousands of pounds." But I think those are the main reasons, aren't they? And I suppose it's just there's an element of just prejudice, isn't there? It's sort of if they're poor people that are on benefits, then they're not the class of person that people want in their home, in their rented properties.
It's also like, it's just things like lots of landlords think that people on universal credit like won't look after the place nicely. And so again, it's a really weird thing, but I've actually had people show private landlords like pictures of their previous homes and gone like, no, 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 this is like I like to take pride in my home. And again, little things like, oh, I am getting a loan from Universal Credit to help me buy furniture or to help me, you know, sort of make the place a home and stuff like that. That can sort of for help. So
it looks like somebody said my audio's cutting out. Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah. I was a bit quiet before. Because can anybody who was having problems hearing me before hear me any better now? Because I don't think it's my microphone level.
I've not noticed.
Oh, it says Shannon is also cutting out. Oh dear. So maybe it's just a bad connection generally. So it says. So have I been? So Ginger G's the one who.
I think we've been hearing you fine, but I think it's obviously the connection to the internet or something, or connection to YouTube that's the problem. I'm guessing.
Yeah. Have you been unable to hear me properly all evening, or just for the last few minutes, Ginger G? If you could comment, that would be great. Well, anyway, I guess we're getting quite near the end of the session anyway. I'll try and sort that out. I mean, I think previous weeks it's been fine, hasn't it? Sometimes there's been a bit of echo, but the sound levels have been okay. Unless I'll just see what happens if I go to this other screen. Sorry, I don't know if it's just I've got different, because I don't know if people noticed I changed the backgrounds, and it may be that by doing that, if I go to this one here, my sound is better on one than the other. Yeah, on that one. No, I think the audio level's the same. Oh, it says couldn't hear Mike either. Oh no. Well, I shall. Hopefully, it'll be better next time. Maybe it's just bad luck. Oh, sound is okay for 5 seconds, then cuts out before coming back. Well, I guess.
Are you on a like an Ethernet cable, Will, or are you on Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi, but I mean it's always the same as I've always been.
I just wonder if that might be dropping out or something.
Yeah, I don't know. Because the Zoom, well, because my audio levels seem to be okay, but hopefully it'll be better next time. It's still cutting out. Maybe I should try stopping it and then starting the live stream again or something. So apologies to everyone. I hope it was as enjoyable as it could be if you couldn't hear us. But we might as well call it a day there then and just hope it's better next time. I think I should be around. I think will we all be around on Thursday? And I'll be back Monday next week. And if you've got, so I may need to connect to the router. Yeah, I think I am connected and the videos coming through, but we'll see. Anyway, hopefully next week will be better. But I might do a sound check or something next time. But thank you for letting me know. Please let me know as soon as possible if it happens again. So I can get to it. But thanks everybody. I'll end the session for now and see you all next time. Yeah, bye.